It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast. Yes, streaming right across Australia with the latest conversations shaping the property market, from Darwin to Canberra and all of those regional hotspots in between. We focus on what is really happening beyond the hype and definitely behind some of those headlines at the moment. And good morning wherever you're listening from across Australia, or are you overseas and part of our growing expat audience? You know, keeping one eye on home and the other eye on your next move. There's a lot of people looking at moving back to Australia. And June is getting closer. Gee, we're rattling through the year, aren't we? It's a Thursday, May the 21st. Happy birthday if you're celebrating. Mr. T is turning 74. I guess if you're old enough, you know who Mr. T is. And Judge Judy, she's celebrating a birthday today. She's turning 84. That is the most unlikeliest of duos I think we've ever read out when it comes to birthday calls. I'd love to see both of those sit down for a cup of tea somewhere. Famous events too on this day for May the 21st. Back in 1980, The Empire Strikes Back is released in cinemas. Did you go along and see that? Because I definitely did. Now, new lending data released over the past week is reinforcing signs of a slowing housing property market. Investors are increasingly considering commercial property following the federal budget's tax changes, while Sydney and Melbourne continue to show early signs of price weakness. You know, it is a very big jump, isn't it, to consider suddenly commercial property? There's lots to consider with that. If you're doing that, we would love to hear from you. You know, jumping from the residential sector into commercial. Has that sort of pressed your button with what has happened with the budget? Let us know. The email address, as always, is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. Let's head off to Sydney right now and catch up with Aidan Hartley. He's a mortgage broker at refinance.com.au. And welcome to you, Aidan, to the Real Estate Breakfast. Were you around in 1980 to go and see the Empire Strikes Back? And are you a Star Wars fan?
Morning, Craig. Thank you for having me on. Short answer to both is no. I was a 1987 baby and didn't really follow too much Star Wars, despite my father was a big fan, but never really caught on to it.
All right, so not a fan. The property market is now clearly moving into this more cautious phase after years of this aggressive growth that we seem to be talking more and more about with the higher rates, the tighter borrowing conditions. Are we, do you think, at the moment, from a mortgage lending capacity, entering a completely different cycle for Australian real estate? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And more of the emphasis will be on investors. Typically, owner-occupiers have fallen a little bit because the cost of living has increased. We've had 3 increases, but that's only going to knock off maybe 5 to 10% of borrowing power. Whereas investors, because of the negative gearing changes post the budget, we're seeing huge wholesale changes to borrowing powers, which is still very much to be confirmed. However, the figures can be as much as 30% in some cases, as in investor borrowing. If they're going to the bank for a borrowing power, it can drop off by hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases.
Now, is it some or many investors who are reassessing these long-term strategies following the proposed changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax? Like I mentioned, you know, commercial property. Some people are getting into that. Some are accelerating their exit plans. We actually mentioned one of our listeners that wrote in and said exactly that, while others are shifting focus towards cash flow and yield rather than pure capital growth. I think there's a lot of talking inside that particular sentence. So how significantly do you think that investor behaviour could change, especially in the next year, the next 12 months?
Massively. Again, because anything existing, the negative gearing borrowing power has been smashed. It's pretty much been demolished. So any investors that are going to the bank, they'll be able to borrow a lot less. So we'll naturally see a shift in borrowing power between people who are chasing existing properties versus new properties. I've spoken to investors in the last 6-7 days since the budget. I've spoken to buyer's agent, and in order to preserve borrowing power, we are seeing a shift from the established properties in towards the new properties because the negative gearing can still be applied to the new build. So that is one of the switches. As you said, the yield is a big play as well, because from 1st July 2027, we may not be able to negatively gear the properties. Actually losing money on a property from a cash flow perspective is going to become less and less attractive. We'll see value adds, we'll see dual occupancies, we'll see the additions of granny flats, and as you mentioned, commercial property will probably spike as well.
Yeah, we talk about how it's become a genuine two-speed housing market right across Australia. Sydney and Melbourne are beginning to soften, while markets like Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide are still ploughing ahead despite those higher rates. Do you think that the stronger growth market can continue outperforming, or will affordability pressures eventually slow all of these capital cities altogether that, as I say, they're moving forward and despite some of these rises?
Well, we've seen already in 2026, the knock-on effect of the 3 interest rate rises, even pre-budget, has meant a lot of capital cities have decreased in value. So the next 12 months, it might not even be a case of who's going to increase the most. It could even be who's going to decrease the least. It could be a defensive play as to which states are not overly leveraged. They have ability to borrow at a higher amount, and those affordability pressures are going to hit the higher end of the market for sure.
Now, on Tuesday, we were talking to Amanda about the psychology and the pressure and anxiety, especially with younger buyers in the market. We've got this constant news coverage, social media commentary that we highlighted as causing some of this major anxiety for younger buyers. Confidence has been smashed for a lot of buyers, fair to say, which now becomes one of the biggest risks for them in the property market around this whole confidence issue.
Confidence is one of the biggest factors, and we've also got the ability to borrow as well. So normally the confidence hits first. We've seen since the budget, it could even be the case of the confusion around what it looks like from the 1st of July 2027, because a lot of the conversations I'm having, they're not necessarily even about lending or what type of property to buy or the loan. It's just uncovering what the proposed legislation changes are. Often, if someone's in a state of confusion, they're not going to spend 5, 6, 7, 800,000 on an investment property. Until there's more clarity and confidence, people they may get pre-approvals, but we're just seeing already a massive dip in those conversions from pre-approval to full approvals. The auction clearance rate on the weekend in New South Wales was the lowest for a long, long time. The proof's in the pudding there already.
We are talking to Aidan. He is in Sydney this morning. Coming next, we'll look at the whole borrowing question. That is after this.
Decode the property market with insider knowledge and insights to better navigate your real estate journey. If you're a new listener, welcome. We talk to the most knowledgeable real estate experts across Australia every day from 6 a.m.
It is a Real Estate Thursday. Aidan is here with us. Let's talk about the comfortable borrowing rate. Now, that's really a thing of the past for new buyers. There is no such thing as a comfortable borrowing rate, I put it to you, or do you disagree with that? This doesn't really get observed because over a period of time it becomes the new norm, doesn't it? As prices go up and up and up, we just sort of absorb into it. People are borrowing today more than ever. Borrowers, as we said the other day, are increasingly shifting away from asking that question in how much can I borrow, and instead they're starting to focus on how comfortable will repayments feel if rates stay higher for a longer period. It's kind of like throw the dice, let's see where it lands. And that is a major mindset shift compared to the post-pandemic boom years. Are Australians becoming more financially conservative and realistic about property moving forward for maybe the next 24 months?
Yes, they are, Craig. So as you mentioned, whenever things are going well, as in property prices is booming, interest rates are going down, there's confidence in the market, every conversation we have with borrowers is around how much can I borrow? So let's say it's $1 million. They'll start searching. They'll come back every time and say, what do I need to do to get to 1.1 million or 1.2 million? They're going to the maximum and then some. They're trying to borrow more. They're getting money from family. They're borrowing and stealing in order to essentially get as much cash together to acquire the best quality asset because they know there's lots of competition in the market. Whereas the changes since the budget last week and since the 3 RBA rate rises, and also because everything going on in the world, there's possible expectations of 1 or 2 or 3 more rate rises. Borrowers are now asking me, okay, what will the repayments look like, not only today, but in 1 or 2 or 3 rate rises?
How much of the education piece really comes to the fore? Because you're being asked left and right as soon as the announcement is made, okay, tell me, Aidan, how is this going to affect me? So that education piece, it really is a constant, isn't it, for you guys?
Yeah, it is. A confused buyer never buys. It's very much at the minute asking questions around the budget, getting a lot more questions around fixed rate inquiries, which I don't think we've seen for probably 2 years because the expectation was the rates would be going down. Now it's more of a defensive play, as in how do we stop the rates and everything else being impacted on top of that. I saw stats last week that fixed rate inquiries have gone up 250%. Probably for the previous 24 months, I haven't had any conversations around fixed rates. Whereas now, a lot more buyers are coming out the woodwork and saying, okay, how do we just cap the repayments where they are today and lock in that as surety for 2, 3 or 4 years from here?
Aidan, you are a busy chap there in South Sydney. Yes, lots for you to sort of negotiate with your clients and talk through what it all means. Hey, thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning. Really appreciate it. And enjoy your Thursday.
Pleasure. Thank you, Craig. You too.
From the emotion of property, the economic inflation, managing your expectations, lack of stock, price growth, construction appetite, days on the market. Stay informed with us and know your property.
Young people today, I think, are so overwhelmed by information that's coming in, have not necessarily got the skills because no one's been able to teach them what is important, what's not important. Everything seems to add to anxiety, to a sense of unfairness.
Is it fair, do you think, some of the criticism that the baby boomers have actually received? They had a different sort of a mindset, which I think is what you're leaning into anyway.
I'm not suggesting it's easy for millennials. It is very hard to get into the housing market. You know, the entry point seems to be much higher. But most baby boomers who own their home have worked from the time they finished school and sometimes while they were at school until retirement age.
The biggest immediate impact has been through those fuel prices. So diesel running costs for the big equipment on the big projects has been an immediate impact. Those transport and freight costs for every delivery that goes to a construction site in the suburbs, building a home or a townhouse complex, plastic piping that's used for plumbing, those types of things, that's up about 30%. Steel up 5 to 10%. Some aluminium cladding and facade products up about 10%. So it's not everything, but it's becoming a broader set of inputs.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.